Well, welcome back to the Institute of Managers and Leaders for the IML ANZ Development Day, Leading with Purpose. Thank you very much for joining us for the second webinar of the day of 6 webinars. The webinar now is Maintaining the Momentum with Matthew Byrne. And momentum we thought was critical at this stage in the business cycle. We've all gone through that, the COVID-19 challenges that we've faced as businesses and as individuals and professionals. And as Matthew puts it in his introduction, organisations that lose momentum usually end up out of business, sold, or become internally destructive as good culture erodes. And I think that's a very, very important topic right at the moment as we look forward and we start to get back to this new normal, start to get back to offices and start to get back to business as usual. For whatever that means over the coming months. And part of the plan, certainly for the development day, is to give all of our participants, and we've got over 8,500 registrations for today, an idea of let's look forward and let's improve ourselves and our business to take on the challenges ahead and to get through it as a professional, a manager and a leader, and to get our organisations and staff through it. So I think this is a really pertinent topic, maintaining the momentum. And as I said, it's our second of 6 today. The Institute is absolutely delighted to bring this content to our membership base and also our corporate clients who we partner with, and indeed Matthew partners with through IML, to bring about great outcomes for leaders and managers for their organisations and individually. So it's wonderful that we can bring together a group of like-minded people, 8,500 today, to learn, to share ideas. And I encourage you throughout the session to please write some questions in the text box underneath, and ask and certainly communicate back with us, and we'll be able to talk about those at the end of the session after Matthew finishes and presents. So it's wonderful you can all join us today for the Maintaining Momentum webinar. A little bit about Matthew before I start. As I said, Matthew is a facilitator for IML for our Accelerate program. He's also the adjunct faculty member and program director of the General Managers program at AGSM at the University of New South Wales Business School. He joined the faculty in executive education to work in programs to deliver experiential behavioural change, and Matthew certainly does that with the IML work he does, where it's very much face-to-face, hands-on coaching and mentoring managers and leaders through their challenges. Matthew's worked with a range of executives in aligning their personal strategy to corporate strategy, and developing leadership styles and strategies that enable executives to identify and leverage value through their leadership. Matthew has a graduate certificate in psychology and an MBA in strategy from the University of Technology. And as he starts, I'm sure we'll all gain a greater knowledge of Matthew as he shares those insights with us. And Matt, I guess I hope that's provides you with an introduction that's fitting, and I look forward to the webinar you're about to share.
Thank you, Sam, and welcome to everyone who's joined this webinar, and thank you for joining. We've got basically the next 55 minutes together, where I'm going to basically just be sharing some thoughts and some ideas around maintaining and momentum, and around re-establishing momentum as well. And looking at that from the real sort of what needs to be done from a leadership point of view, from a team point of view, and from an organizational point of view, so that you get a sort of a bit of a feel about what all needs to be in play for momentum to really take place. We'll have some time for questions as well, as Sam said, so please think about some good questions for us to talk about. I thought I'd start here. Organizations tend to want to really build a sense of direction, and the sense of direction is really built through the vision, mission, goals, objectives, and the plans. And this is not new information to all of us. This is where probably in the last 30 years, organizations have really tried to establish momentum. But I wanted to just go back one step and say that this, vision, mission, goals, objectives, and plans only really has been in place since the 1980s. Before that, we basically ran through the breaking down of tasks into smaller tasks that most people can run really at a highly repetitive rate. And so at that stage, momentum was driven by the machine that we were doing and the work that we were doing, rather than by the individuals who were doing it. And so basically, for a lot of the industrialization and the way we worked, our role was to try and keep up with the momentum that was set for us, rather than to generate that momentum. And so the vision, mission, goals was an idea to start us to think about how would we start to engage the workforce into the concept of momentum. And this is where we have to also be very clear about that the sense of momentum, when we talk about vision, mission, goals, objectives, and plans, is also a sense of tension that sits within an organization quite naturally. And so the organizations are usually made up of people who are highly customer business focused, and also of people who are highly technical and also have a sense of expertise around something. And so the momentum for that person who is sort of customer focused, sort of more what we would call more business minded, is different than the momentum for a person who is a technical expert within the organization. That usually creates, in a normal situation, quite a bit of tension. And that tension is good. That is a really good tension, because it helps us to get to this concept that a lot of organizations run by, and a lot of organizations talk around, this 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule quite simply just states that 80% of your success, impact, revenue, profit is made of 20% of your endeavors, and so therefore you are spending 80% of your revenue is really not generated by 80% of your endeavors of what you do, but only really 20% of what you do. And so that then also leads to the thing that the concept around that, is near enough good enough, or does it have to be perfect? And so there's this constant conflict that comes around that talks about that where a lot of people saying, this is 80% done, this is 80% good, let's move with that and let's get into the marketplace with that, where the others are sitting there and saying, no, there's still 20% of work that needs to be done. In the business mind, that 20% of work is where the diminishing return is, which means that we don't really get real value out of that extra 20%. We only get real value of that first 80%. And so most business people are really just striving to something that is 80%, and then wanting to move forward, get it out, get it into the marketplace, create the momentum with that. Whereas the technical side is really sitting there and saying, we can't really go out with that until we've got that it's 100%, and it's fail safe, it's perfect in that sense. And so that creates then that concept that between perfection and and fit for purpose. And so we got this constant challenge that happens there. Now, that is what we would call really, really good in an organization, to have that tension, because it creates a sense of dialogue, creates a sense of discussion to actually find out where the actual best point is in order to move forward. It changes a little bit in the sense in times of adversity and uncertainty, and so where what happens is that some people can get stuck and can't move forward because they don't understand if it's strong enough for them, and other people are trying to move forward too early. And that tension now becomes conflict within the organization, and it becomes a real aspect of not just, are we doing the right thing, but it actually now starts to hit us in that sort of more values aspect of the work that we do. And then we start to either resist it or we actually move too fast. And so when we think about, when we think about in the traditional sense of moving too fast, we always thought about moving from problem to solution and going straight into that area and keep moving forward, which we have found to be not highly efficient and not really productive, yet we keep still doing it. And so that sort of thinking strategically was to help us to not go from problem to solution, but take a step back and actually sit there and look at options and look at the best way to move forward and then to move forward. And so this tension that is created within the organization, which is that quite natural tension to move forward, at some stage becomes too big for the organization to handle, and then what happens is you start to lose momentum. So a lot of organizations in the last couple of months have lost momentum. You may be working for some of those organizations that have lost that momentum. Some organizations within in the last 3 months have gained a massive amount of momentum. And they're basically sitting there saying, how do we manage all of this momentum that we have, and how do we not lose that momentum when that wave finishes? And then there's probably the bulk of the organizations that are sitting at that moment saying, we're probably still working at 60% of what we thought we would be, and now we're sitting there coming out of this and trying to move to more to normal, and now the organizational expectations are going back onto the bottom line, and they're going back onto the sense of saying, so we've got 7 months left of the year, so how do we get to our goals? How do we get to our financial goals? And can we still reach them by the end of the year? And what can we do in order to create that growth and that momentum in order to be able to harness those opportunities? So when we think about that, we often think about this concept of strategy around the setting of an aspiration. And so we often set these aspirations, and what happens is that sometimes we think these aspirations are too low, or sometimes we think these aspirations are too high. In most cases, when I go into organizations and I talk to people about the aspirations that they hold, they usually always come back to me and said they're unachievable, they're too high, they are unrealistic. And so therefore the buy-in to that aspiration is very tentative. And I start hearing things like, that's Matthew's aspiration, not my aspiration. That's what Matthew wants to do. So let Matthew go and try that. And if he's successful, I'll get on the bandwagon with him. If he's not, then I'm not tarnished with the failure. And so what happens is we struggle in organizations at times to get our head around and to align people behind this sense of aspiration. So that becomes even more challenging, and some of you are actually right now are questioning and re-looking at your aspirations and resetting your aspirations, because the disruption we've just been noticing has given us a huge amount of opportunity to reflect and to think about, are our old aspirations the right aspirations to have? And so we're now starting to think about those type of aspirations and what they should look like and how we need to set them and reset them for this year and for for next year. And so you can sit there and say that so if you take Woolworths as an example, one of the clients that I've done some work with, they basically had an aspiration in order to be the market leader, which means to have more market share than Coles, and to control the market share of Aldi, which is the disruptive retail chain that is coming into that marketplace that has been shown to be quite successful. In the last 3 months, Woolworths has had probably the best 3 months in trading than it's had for a long time. And you know, as you probably have noticed in your own shopping experiences, that when was the last time you noticed that shopping shelves were empty, that you know, supply was struggling to keep up with the demand that the shoppers were having around some of those goods. Now you can imagine that for 3 months, Woolworths has been selling 7 months of use of toilet paper every month, which means that some people may now have 21 months of toilet paper sitting at home, and so therefore they may not be buying a lot of toilet paper over the next 2 years. And so when you think about, and that might be for some other products, pasta, rice, cleaning materials and other things. And so now, the Woolworths has been very good at sort of living that initial aspiration of, maintaining the #1 position. But the question is now, how do they maintain that? How do they actually get back into, how do they maintain that momentum they have when they can possibly see that over the next 3 months, there will be a significant dip in retail shopping activity, specifically for those type of items, and in the way that those items are distributed. So that's one side. So Woolworths is clearly thinking about what aspirations do we need to change and hold now in order to make sure that we maintain that momentum. And then you have other organizations like the restaurant group that has Neil Perry, and some of you might know Neil Perry as a restaurateur, as a TV chef. The organization that holds the rock pool and these nice high-end dining restaurants. They now have, I think, about 12 restaurants in their brand and about 36 locations around Australia, and they are someone who employs about 2,000 to 3,000 people around Australia, and they have basically been closed for 3 months, and are now just thinking about starting to open again. And their way of opening is still highly restricted, right? They can only have 10 people. Eventually there'll be 20 people, and eventually they'll be able to have 50 people. However, they have to now operate their business based around 1 person per 4 square meters, which means that they, that even though they might be able to legally take more people, they physically can't because their premises aren't big enough to cope with that new way of doing business. And so they're severely disrupted. Qantas would be another example of that. The CEO went public 2 days ago saying we cannot maintain social distancing and the airline at the same time. So if we want to operate, we will have to operate without social distancing. And so those type of organizations are desperately looking to try and gain that momentum. And so when we set these aspirations now, and you'll be sitting there setting these types of aspirations, you need to really investigate the reality. And not just the reality that is there for you as the person setting the aspiration, but the reality of the people who need to buy into that aspiration. And it's not, and that reality, and that what is real is sometimes perceived. It can be a perception, and sometimes it could actually be something that is actually really there, but we're just not seeing it. So the problem most organizations have with momentum is that they start to set these aspirations, but they don't really understand the reality, which means that at that moment, getting the buy-in to move forward becomes really, really difficult. They really struggle to get those people to actually mobilize into action, because people are looking at that aspiration and saying, I can't get to that. And that's what, because I, as your leader, don't understand the reality, what's real for us in trying to achieve that aspiration. Or we might actually find that the work that we need to do to achieve that aspiration from where we are at the moment seems to be not clear, it seems to be fuzzy, it seems to be intangible, it seems to be hard for us to get started. It's like, you know, sitting there and saying, you know, some of you over the last 3 months, when you've had a bit of time, have decided, I'm going to write my memoirs and write my, you know, Matthew Byrne, My Way, the great book of Matthew Byrne. And you sit there and all of a sudden you're looking at a blank piece of paper, right? And you're just needing to get started. And you have no idea what you're going to write, what you're going to write about, how you're going to write, and all of a sudden your mind starts moving into huge amount of different aspects around the work that may not be valuable. And so how do you get a person who, you know, who wants to write their memoirs? How do you get them moving? And the advice we give to writers is just start anywhere. Don't try to have the whole story in your head before you start writing. Just start anywhere. And so when we actually understand the reality of where people actually are, and we can link them to the aspiration, then we need to, then all of a sudden we can find those places that we can start the work. And when we start that work, at different places, sometimes that work will lead somewhere, sometimes that work will not lead anywhere. And that's what we call this sort of experimentation phase, when we're trying to get things to work and trying to get things to do. And so therefore, we have a lot more activities that are going than actually that will be successful. And so we need to then be prepared to take our system, our team, the people we work with, through a series of go, no go scenarios, where we're doing something and then we find out that that type of work actually isn't helping us to get close to that aspiration. Now, we look at that and say, oh, we really want to know before we actually do the work, because otherwise we'll be wasting time and effort. And the reality is, when you look back at the organization, we're still wasting time and effort, even when we know what the work is, because we thought we knew what the work needed to be done, but we didn't take into consideration that reality. So when you look at the Westpac of when you look at the reality of Qantas, for instance, or the restaurant, their reality is very, very different to the reality of a Coles or a Woolworths, as an example, or another organization that I'm working with, which produces packaging material, a small, medium-sized company that produces packaging material that's had the best 3 months of their organizational history. But they also know that that's going to start to come off, and that they're going to start to lose momentum. And once they lose that momentum, they need to figure out what will regenerate that type of momentum. And so we need to understand, where is the organizational reality? What can the organization do? Where is the reality of the people that work within the organization, and where is the actual real reality of the regulation and restrictions that we have in order to be able to move forward? And so I see this as a lot. I work for, you know, as organizations are looking to go back to face-to-face teaching, there is in a lot of, you know, organizations who've done face-to-face teaching for a long part of their working career, universities, big corporations, and those type of things, who've done a lot of, you know, face-to-face teaching, are now struggling with that concept of that the new way we will do face-to-face will be very different to the way we've done it before. Our reality has fundamentally changed. And if we don't take time to analyze and diagnose that reality, we will never understand the work that needs to be done to link to the aspiration. And so that's really, really important, because if you don't do that, what happens is you can't keep the work together, and people go outside of the container of that work. They escape out to the side. And these are and this is where you hear comments like, yep, we tried that before and it didn't work. I can't see that working because you don't understand our reality. I don't have the resources to do this. I don't have the time. I don't have the capability set within my people to be able to do that kind of work. And all of these questions start to come up, which basically starts to push down momentum and brings that momentum to a real stall. And so when you think about, that there's two organizations at the moment who could in 3 months, in 6 months time, be in serious trouble. Woolworths could be one of them, and Qantas, or this restaurant chain, could be the other one. They could be in absolute serious trouble because on one side they couldn't re-establish momentum, and on the other side they couldn't maintain that momentum. And that's because they don't really understand, they haven't spent that time in their reality in order to do that. And so what are the things that you do? So if you start to look at this aspiration reality as a container for the work that needs to be done, and saying we aspire to so let's take Woolworths as an example. We aspire to move our business into more fresh food, deli type sales, because those are the perishables that people have to keep coming back and buy again. And we go and we reduce our ability to store and have shelf space for the more staples. And so therefore we start to change the design of our retail outlets, of our supermarkets, in order to be able to cater for that new aspiration and really get back to that concept of the fresh food people, and really start bringing people back in for different reasons than they may have done that in the past. And then they have to really understand their reality around, do I actually have the capability in the staff that I have there now in order to be able to execute that? Does my brand have the believability that people will actually see that as something that they will come in and still do still do? And then on the other hand, you've got companies that are trying to regain momentum again, and they're going to have to do things quite differently. They're going to have to not just change their procedures, but have a totally different mindset in the way that they are looking at their business model. And so you could already see that the CEO of Qantas, when they said we can't actually maintain our airline based around social distancing, that at this stage they are starting to grapple to understand their reality, and they now believe they can't meet their aspiration. And so therefore that aspiration may need to change, and that aspiration might need to be different for them in the short term in order to regain momentum and to reunite a large workforce behind that. You might see the same thing for restaurants that are opening now, that that they need to understand that reality better in order to create a different dining experience. I can tell you, I went, the moment I could go out for dinner, I went out, and I went to my local restaurant on Friday night, and there were 10 people in this massive restaurant, and I can tell you the atmosphere was really quite suppressed, and it was not the experience I was hoping for. And you see that, for instance, sporting organizations at the moment are trying to reopen their leagues and their competitions, and they are focusing on one reality, which is the safety of the players. So the German soccer league has just opened up with the most amazing way of protecting and keeping their players safe. And the Korean Football League has launched as well. Both launched at the same time, and they're now playing every weekend. And the Korean launched as well with the same safety concerns. But what Koreans did is they actually thought about the viewing public's experience of the soccer match compared to the German league, which didn't consider the viewing public's experience. What is the viewing public's reality of watching a football match that has no people in the stadium? And so what the Korean league has done is they have, through their stadium and stadium loudspeakers, they pipe chanting from fans that they have recorded earlier. And so now what you have when you watch the Korean league, you have this sort of soundtrack, this noise of fans that are clearing, chanting, singing, banging drums, doing all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the German league, you basically hear 22 people yelling at each other to please pass the ball to me. And so now we've got the experiences are quite different. And people are now coming back saying that the fans are saying back that they actually enjoy the Korean experience more than they actually enjoy the European experience, because the European experience, when they looked at their reality, did not look wide enough into the reality, and they did not keep that container really closed so that the work could happen to come up with the idea of actually putting a soundtrack into an empty stadium to watch people, so that the people who are watching from home have an experience that is closer to the experience that they love. And so that's one of the things that restaurants will be struggling with. So you may be going to a restaurant one day where there might be a soundtrack of glasses kindling, of muffled speaking in the background, of the occasional laughter in the background, so that when we are there sitting in our 10 tables, we actually might just get the feeling that we're amongst people again. And so that might be a reality that they need to cover. I'm going to talk about how we now contain that work and really create momentum. So the way we do that is through this concept of what we call principles and practices. And so if the aspiration reality is really far apart and we've got this real gap, sometimes it's here and we don't really need a lot of principles and practices, but sometimes it's here and we actually need that. You actually need to actually understand saying, so what are some of the core principles that we need in order to generate momentum with in our organization? And then what are going to be the practices that are actually going to ensure that that momentum will, that principle is being enacted? I'll give you another Qantas example that has happened, and so the Qantas came out in February making a statement that their planes are being cleaned to the highest standards, and because they're cleaned to the highest standards and have got extra cleaning being done, it is safe to fly. This was before the lockdown that we experienced. One of the cleaners went through a lot of different levels of trying to alert their management that actually the statement they made actually wasn't true, and they were actually not cleaning to those highest levels of standards. Eventually, that person went public and told the media that actually we're not cleaning the planes to that level of standard that was being proposed within the press release, and that person was terminated. Now, and to finish that part of the story, the person went to Fair Work. Fair Work believed that that person had a claim, and in the end, fined Qantas $500,000 for terminating them. And so there were two principles in play here. So the principle of protecting the whistleblower, which most organizations have as part of their policies embedded within their firm, their organization, and that allows people to speak up and to voice their concerns, compared to another principle that you can't actually go public with your concerns. They need to be aired within the organization. And so you have these conflicting principles now, but then you have to look at the other side. And so what is the actual practice in order to make those principles come alive? Was there a practice to support an internal dialogue when people actually were in dispute with the aspiration of the of that press release? And is there is a practice of terminating people based on policy really the right thing to do? And so I can tell you, having worked just recently with quite a few Qantas staff members, they were that momentum was lost severely through the termination of that person, not because they had a personal relationship with them, not because they knew that person, not because flight crew are incredibly connected to the cleaning crew. None of that took place. The principle did not match the practice. And the moment the principle does not match the practice, motivation goes down and momentum goes down. And so you may find that you've had organizations in the past, and in your organization, just as an example, for the last 3 months, think about your organization. You may have had some principles and practices in place that worked really, really well for you, and some principles and practices that didn't work so well for you, but because everything was moving, there was momentum, we didn't really have to pay close attention to it. And then all of a sudden, your whole situation has changed, and then some of those principles and practices that weren't working so well now have totally collapsed. And so they now have to find different ways of different practices in order to keep those principles alive. And some of those principles may not necessarily be useful for you at the moment. Now, the difference between principles and practices, compared to values and virtues, is the fact that the principles and practices are really contextual to the aspiration and the reality that you're in. And so therefore, your principles and practices are quite contextual to the aspiration and the reality. And so when you're thinking about what's my aspiration for my team, where is the reality team, what kind of principles are now essential for me to have, and how do we practice them? And so that we're practicing them all the time. And so therefore, you may find that you're looking for some new opportunities. You need to go into some form of an innovative process in order to gain and maintain momentum. And so you may have a principle around no idea is a bad idea. And then the question is, what practices do you have in order to support that principle? Are you paying lip service to that principle? And where people said that's the worst idea that I heard, and now because that is not the right thing to say anymore, I'll just have 30 seconds of silence, and then I'll move on to any other ideas. Or what practices do we have in order to make sure that every idea is heard? And so a practice about no idea is a bad idea is to make sure that an idea actually is acknowledged and elaborated on. And so therefore, no matter how bad the idea is, we will acknowledge and elaborate on that idea to see how far we can develop that idea, and if that idea can connect to another idea which can inspire us to come up with a third idea. Now, there is a practice that actually now helps to keep that principle alive. I acknowledge and I elaborate. And so therefore, if you can make sure that your team is having meetings, no matter where they're having meetings and conversations, and somebody comes up with an idea and you can acknowledge and elaborate it, and that becomes a practice of how your system works. This is how we roll. Then your principle and practices are aligned and momentum is created. And it's a massive amount of momentum that you create with that. And so I'm not talking, and so some of us are looking for the big idea, right? What does that big idea look like? The piping of chanting into an empty stadium so that the home viewer has a more complete experience. That idea has come from people, some good principles and practices being in place to allow people to come up with those type of ideas. And you probably could imagine that the first time that idea was we'll just pipe chanting into the stadium, that a lot of people would have sat back and said, oh, that's a pretty bad idea, right? That's not really that good. I feel uncomfortable with that idea. But by acknowledging and elaborating, that idea got through and is now actually really helping the Korean Football League in order to create momentum. And momentum for the league internally with the people that are there, externally that were the people who are watching it, and of course the government who is allowing them to participate as long as nobody gets sick, right? Because you can imagine even here as the leagues are opening up in Australia, huge amount of thinking is going into about how to keep things safe and how to make things work. And if it doesn't work, you can see the government will probably close it down pretty quickly. So that's basically one of the things that is at the core of momentum. If you are, and my advice to you is to reflect for a moment about some of the aspirations and realities that you're facing with your teams at the moment, or the work that you're doing, and what are some of the principles and practices that are in place at the moment. And the reason I say that is principles and practices are in place. You may not know them, but they are there. Because if you don't create them, if you are not intentional in the way that you are putting them together, they will actually just be created by themselves. And so the first thing I do when I'm looking to create momentum in an organization is I look for their principles and practices. And you'd be surprised when I sit there and says, you've got these principles and practices. And people say, oh, I had no idea that they were our principles and practices. And so so you become aware of those principles and practices, and you actually then look for the alignment of them. I've been in organizations where I could identify 10 to 15 principles and about 8 to 9 practices, and those practices did not align to any of those principles. And so what we were doing was different to what we are saying. And I think that takes us back right to the most basic leadership, the most basic leadership concept is to walk the talk. And principles and practices is the way that we walk the talk. That allows you in your teams to be working on the aspiration, the reality, the principles and practices, and you are allowing the team to do the work. And you're not getting into, and you're creating that container for them to do that work. I'm going to pause here, Sam, and give it back to you so that you can, so we can get some questions, some thoughts and feedback about what we've just talked about.
Thanks, Matthew. Super engaging, very practical, and always thought-provoking. So thank you, Matthew, for that. It's certainly, every time I listen to you, it's that next level up, and certainly, always providing interesting insights into how we can take that next step as a leader and a manager in our organisations. I can certainly reflect on the pumping in of fans. I'm not sure if people watched the NRL or the AFL when they first kicked off, but I've certainly noticed the difference watching it on TV. It wasn't as engaging without the roar of the fans in the background. It just seemed a bit flat. So perhaps the NRL and AFL are taking lessons from the Korean Football League, I hope,
Yes.
and are going to pipe in some fan noise. We've got a couple of questions here, Matthew, that have come throughout the session, and many positive comments about your delivery style and the content itself. So that's fantastic. First one is, have you observed differences between the public and private sector in terms of maintaining momentum? And this goes to actually a comment earlier where I think it was Phil who'd made the comment at the very beginning about how it's very difficult in the public sector working with a minister to understand that aspirational versus the relativity of the situation. So have you observed any differences between public and private sector momentum and maintaining it?
Yes. So the easy answer is no, right? The more longer answer is that, you know, the aspiration is that in public service, you actually don't have alignment of aspirations most of the time, and so therefore the aspiration of the minister could be quite different to the the secretary or the head of the public service, which again could be quite different to the aspiration that the team might hold, right? And so therefore, if you're talking about, you know, welfare, or you're talking about housing or something like that, the team might have an aspiration that is deeply based around their purpose of helping others and being good stewards with public money. And then you have, and that as the higher you go into the organization, those aspirations don't align. And so in private organizations or public organizations or for-profit organizations, that aspiration tends to be more aligned than it does in the public service. And one of the things that makes it difficult for the public service is that people can't really talk about the aspirations. You know, so the aspirations that are put in the room tend to sometimes not be the real aspirations that are taking place. And you know, I'm probably now starting to talk a little bit like an episode of Yes Minister, but I'll, you know, I'll probably leave it there. And so therefore, your principles and practices need to take that into account, and you need to sit there and say, does our aspiration that we hold align with the aspirations of the others? And if it doesn't, how can we align that without actually losing total momentum in that sense? And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring those varying aspirations that could be all in different places, at least closer together. And then having some strong principles and practices in order to guide you through that ambiguity. I believe that you know, that working in the public service is a great way of dealing with ambiguity and constant change. And those principles and practices sometimes that I see within the public service don't quite align to deal with that fluidity and flexibility, because we have, you know, our worldview gets in the way sometimes of managing that. And I'm not saying that we have to give up our worldview and our personal aspirations, because the moment we do that, we're lost. It's about trying to allow those to live whilst other aspirations are playing out around that. I believe that is the strength of the manager. If you are a strong public service manager and people hold on to your aspiration, then the work that is being done based on your aspiration there will be huge amount of momentum. Your role is then to make sure that you start aligning in those other aspirations to the work that is being done to your aspiration. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep. I think you've covered that very well, and it perhaps leads into this next question around. And I know you talked about the fact that, you know, no idea is a bad idea in terms of, you know, if you live that principle and implementing that into your workplace. Michelle's asked, how do you distinguish between the no part of a go, no go? So situation and losing momentum of those who put forward the idea that led to the no.
So I think so. So there's two parts to this answer. The first one is run the experiment and see if it works and gather data. And if it doesn't work, then that data actually gives you that level of insight in order for it to say no to it. The other way, and so that comes out of the innovation paradigm. The innovation paradigm always sits there and says, you may end up with 10 ideas. You run 10 mini experiments. Out of that, 5 will automatic, the data will tell you that 5 are not going to progress, right? And for some of us who are just trying to work on that day-to-day area, and we don't have the time or the indulgence to spend on that, we then have to go on to an understanding of the team. And so I'm not talking about consensus. I'm talking about the role of a leader. And so you have a team of 5 people and somebody says idea, 2 are saying idea. You have a team of 6 people, that makes it easier. You have 3 people saying, let's go for idea A, and 3 people are saying, let's go for idea B. And you now have to make a decision which of those ones you're going forward with, because you can't go forward with both. And so you have to make that decision. That's what you get paid the medium-sized bucks for being a manager, is you have to break the tie, you have to make the decision. And at that point, if you go for A or B, doesn't really matter. What matters is that you make a decision. Because will it be right or will it be wrong? Who knows? But you need to do something. And so in the absence of doing nothing, you need to make a decision to do one of those two. And so you have to make a decision to break the tie. And at that moment, you have to explain why your decision has gone against those people who wanted idea A, because you decided with idea B. And and at that moment, you have to acknowledge their idea, really sit there and says, I heard your concepts, and maybe your idea actually could work better than idea B because of these 3 things that you have said would be the real difference in this idea. But my decision at this stage, rightly or wrongly, will be for idea B, and I'm still asking for your support in order to move forward. In most cases, people will still support you if they feel that they have you have been heard, and you can play back their key arguments as to why they wanted their idea to live. If you do that, then people tend to still follow you. If you just shut them down, then people tend to just boycott idea B. Is that useful?
I think that's very useful, and I think people, at the end of the day, after that explanation, they certainly explain the decision that's made. We'll get far greater respect. Matthew, are you still there? I can see you.
I'm here. Has my picture frozen?
Yes, it has. Well, it has on mine, but that's okay as long as you're still there. There's a lot of questions coming through, and let's just cover a couple of them because we've got another couple of minutes. Any comments about the relative merits of real-time analytics and reporting versus going with your gut in terms of making decisions and changing direction and approach?
So going with your gut. So your gut feel, your intuition is the sum of all your experiences of your life. And so therefore, gut feel and intuition are really, really good indicators in order to move for decision making. Okay, so a lot of people try to say no and all that kind of stuff like that, but it is a very good indicator for decision making. And if most of us are truly honest with ourselves, we go with the gut feel. Now, sitting right next to the gut feel also are our biases and templates, which means that we tend to overshadow our gut feel with our fears, right? Because we don't like doing certain things. We just don't like, so the idea might be to hold a presentation in front of 5,000 people and whip them into a frenzy to create real momentum for our organization to move forward. And you may believe that you are the worst presenter in the world. And so therefore, your gut feel might be telling you to crush that idea rather than to bring that idea live and to rise to the occasion. Okay. So that's so that gut feel and fear mechanism, that those are internal biases, sit very, very closely to each other. And what helps us in understanding our gut feel better is talking about it, and that's why we have mentors, because we go there and it says, I've just had this idea that I need to present to 5,000 people, and I really hate presenting to 5,000 people because I'm a really bad presenter. Right, and talk that through with the mentor, or a confidant, as we call them as well, just to get yourselves to separate those two feelings and emotions that go with it. In reality, when you're moving forward, specifically from COVID, there is your previous experience of your life may no longer be valuable for what is going to happen next. And so at that moment, you need data. So at that moment, you need to run a small experiment in order to get that data. And so that data might be that it's saying, yep, I'm happy to think about the 5,000, presenting to 5,000 people, but let me just do a quick presentation to 20 people and see how that goes first. And so why don't we just get my immediate team together, and I'll have a presentation with that, get some feedback, some idea, and they may tell me, if they're honest with me, that Matt, you should not be presenting that maybe you should get Sam to present that because he's much better at it. And then you just come at the beginning and at the end, endorse Sam and allow Sam to do that role, right? And so you're starting, so that data collection can be quite intuitive data collection based around some mini experiments that you run in order to give you some insights into what you need to do for the big one.
Thanks, Matthew. Very good answer, very thorough, and the feedback coming through is phenomenal. I think, as someone put it, you were a very considered presenter, and I take that as an exceptional compliment, Matthew. So well done. We've unfortunately run out of time. There are a lot of questions that have been left unanswered, and I'm really sorry we haven't been able to answer those. We will try to answer those questions in due time. But thank you very much for your participation today. It's certainly it's a huge day of learning, and I think Matthew's lifted today's through talking about maintaining where we are, maintaining that momentum, taking that next step as a leader, as a manager, and also an organisation. Matthew, you also talked about the importance of coaching and mentoring through this period. Obviously, all of our leadership programs and the work that you do with IML includes coaching and mentoring. If anyone would like to speak to Matthew, hear more from Matthew, and learn more of these principles, please get in touch with IML. I know the website's not up there, but it's info@managersandleaders.com.au. So info@managersandleaders.com.au, or our phone number is 1300 661 061. That's 1300 661 061. Please get in touch with us if you would like more. Now, one thing I did neglect at the beginning was to say that all of the resources that Matthew has gone through, the slides, will be sent to you as a playbook after the session. I believe probably on Monday morning you'll receive that with a recording of this webinar. So everyone will have the recording, the resources, and the slides for them to support them to get through this next period and take that forward to develop as a manager and leader. But look, on behalf of everyone at IML, Matthew, thank you for your ongoing support and your brilliant work as a facilitator, certainly for our Accelerate program, and also working with many of our corporate clients to develop their leaders and their leadership strategies. So thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for their attendance. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, which starts in 15 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thanks all for listening to me and having and taking your time to spend today in working on yourselves. So have a great day.
Thanks.